Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. So I'm doing something slightly different today and I'm going to be doing damage profiles. So this is what the primary damage of that champion is, whether they do AP, AD, whether it's a small amount of AD, whether it's a small amount of AP, or whether they do hybrid damage because you can itemize them in certain ways, which affects their overall damage output. So yeah, for the first part, I'm going to be covering tanks. These are mostly champions which build defensive options, not champions which just primarily build bruiser, as that kind of that leans itself more towards just the bruiser class in general. So let's get into it. To begin with, Cho'Gath is going to be in the primary AP tier. So Cho'Gath does do a decent amount of true damage, of course, with his ultimate doing a huge amount of burst, but the rest of his kit does do AP. You do auto a bit, but that doesn't really make up for much physical damage, so he finds himself in the AP category. Poppy, on the other side of things, finds herself within the primary AD category. She does physical with her E, physical with her R, physical with her Q. Her passive does do magic, but not a huge amount. It doesn't have any other scaling other than level. Her W does do magic damage as well, but that doesn't do enough to really offset her as being a mostly AD option. She ends up just being a straight up primary AD option. Of course, if you're going tank, then that makes it a bit closer towards being mostly AD. But yeah, she's primary AD because her builds tend to consist of Sundered Sky. Dead Man sometimes works as a good option. Frozen Heart. All these options work quite nicely on Poppy, and then yeah, she finds herself in the primary category. Leona does auto a decent amount, enough that it puts her in the mostly AP and not the primary AP category. However, her E and her R do enough magic damage to kind of just offset her as being a mostly AP option. Rammus is going to be in the primary AP option. So Rammus builds Formel, which does reflective magic damage. He does just output a lot of magic damage in general, though. His Q, his ultimate, and his W all do magic damage. He autos a bit, but not enough to offset that. And you can go Sorks on Rammus. Sorks is a really strong item on him. Definitely do consider it. Thresh is going to be in the primary AP category. So Thresh does just straight up do mostly magic, as he his Q, his E, his ultimate will do magic damage. He does auto a bit, but also like Rammus, not enough to offset him as being a mostly AP option. Whereas Leona tends to be more in the front line. Thresh can kind of weave in and out, make use of his lantern, make use of his like distant with hooks. Leona needs to be in front line to use Qs. Mordekaiser, a primary AP option, so no shock to anyone. Mordekaiser builds the likes of Rylai and Riftmaker, which means he does a huge amount of magic damage. He does auto a bit, but nowhere near enough to offset that. And of course, he is lower base AD because he has a passive on-hit effect of magic damage, which does have an AP scaler. So Mordekaiser finds himself in the primary AP tier. Alistar also within the primary AP tier, so all of his abilities do magic damage. Doesn't really do enough autoing to find himself in the tier below with Leona. Even with his E kind of incentivizing auto and like moving with the opponent, just not enough. Nunu also in the primary AP category, so he's got so Nunu has one of the highest AP to AD offsets, where he does next to no AD damage because you're not only do your autos just not do a lot of damage, but you are playing more at a range distance to utilize your E, and because you're not as durable as a lot of the other tanks, you tend to go Liandry, and some of your other items just don't kind of like add up to enough defensive stats. Of course, later on into the game, you do work as a solid tank option, but yeah, with Liandry, and if you're going in a AP option, you do tend to be a bit squishier. Maokai is going to be in the primary AP category. So Maokai does do a lot of AP damage with his Q, lots of AP damage with his saplings, does do a bit of his ultimate. His W also does magic damage. His entire damage profile, in fact, is just magic. He does have insane attack speed. Maokai is one of the highest attack speeds in the level 1 attack speeds in the game, but it just doesn't end up being enough to really offset that. And yeah, he is a primary AP option. Amumu also going to be in the primary AP options. So Amumu, Liandry as well, same as Nunu. Does do some autoing to apply his passive, which converts some magic damage into true damage, but doesn't end up being enough to put him in the mostly AP category. Sion is going to be in the mostly AD category. So Sion Q and Ultimate do a lot of AD damage. His autos, of course, you are going to be using them as he tends to go Titanic, which do end up outputting a decent amount of damage. However, he does do close to hybrid damage with the likes of his W and his E doing AP. Here, if you're opting into Sunfires when you have a lot of health, that is doing a lot of heavy lifting for your damage. And yeah, it does put him pretty close, but for the most part, you are playing Sion as a mostly AD option. Malphite is a mostly AP option. Of course, if you're going AP Malphite, then he's a primary AP option. But as you tend to be playing the likes of Grasp or Arcane Comet in certain matchups, you are utilizing your W more frequently, being able to be in range to auto someone to get those Grasp procs, to get those the damage down. It does mean he does do a decent amount of AD with his auto attacks. Of course, still mostly AP option. His Q, his E, his ult all do magic damage, and if you're going Sunfire, then that amplifies that. Braum is going to be in the primary AP category. So Braum, of course, does want to auto to apply his passive, but it's nowhere near enough to offset the fact that most of his damage does come from his Q. It has a 7.5 health, 7.5% health scaler on it, and that is his primary damage source. Other than that, his ultimate does a bit of magic damage, but yeah, most of his damage does just come from his Q. He is a primary AP option, doesn't do enough autoing to find himself in the tier below. Shyvana is in the hybrid category because she has two builds, and I'm going to also group her with Volibear and Udyr, which have like various builds which they can opt into, which can kind of differ their playstyle. Of course, you can say that a lot of champions can do this, but these are free champions which for the most part are tanky frontliners which can operate under both AD and AP builds and to relative success. A lot of champions can't really do that, which is why these three find themselves here. Volibear's case, it's usually mostly AP as you are going into things like Nashor's and Riftmaker. Udyr tends to be mostly AD as you are utilizing his Q throughout most of the game, and of course you can go the likes of the Titanic build and opt into some certain Sheen items. Shyvana, mostly AP, even if you are opting into AD builds like Bork, Titanic Hydra, and Triforce. You are still doing a decent amount of AP damage with your R, your E, your W. I believe your Q does a certain amount of AP damage as well, of course, if you're building the likes of Wits. So yeah, the hybrid damage for all of these. Blitzcrank is going to be in the mostly AP category. Blitzcrank E does do a decent amount of physical. They are nerfing it in the upcoming patch, but for the most part, you are doing mostly AP with Blitzcrank, not primary AP, as he does do enough damage with his E to kind of just offset that and bring him down a tier. Bard is going to be in mostly AP, so Bard does auto a decent amount. You used to in the past go like an RFC build in certain situations. You don't really see that these days. It's mostly just tank Bard. There are some AP Bards, but not really effective. So yeah, as a tank, Bard does mostly AP. Zac is a primary AP champion, so Zac's W, E, Q and ultimate all do magic damage. He does auto to apply his Q, but I believe the auto does do magic damage in that situation. If you are still autoing this champion, it doesn't offset it. He is a primary AP option. He does build Liandry these days as well, which does increase that even more as being a primary AP option. Tahm Kench is going to be in mostly AP. So Tahm Kench is only just not a primary AP option because he does build the likes of Heartsteel. He does auto enough to offset it and bring him down, but his Q, his W, his ultimate all do magic damage, plus his on hit on the on autos also do magic damage. So yeah, it's pretty close. He is like the closest towards just being a primary AP option. Mundo honestly just hybrid. I mean, Mundo does hybrid damage. So Mundo, Q and W do magic damage. His E does physical. But because of the way Mundo wants to play, he, as like an early game harass champion where you are landing those cleavers, getting a lot of damage done, he does do primarily magic. Of course, later on into the game, you're doing more physical as you're getting the opportunity to auto more, utilize Heartsteel, stuff like this. does do decent physical damage. But yeah, for the most part, you are a hybrid champion because you're semi-user. Well, I mean, you are using cleavers for a lot of the game, and you're autoing for a lot of the game. So yeah, makes him a good hybrid option. Shen is also a good hybrid option. So Shen, if you are not building any items, does like complete hybrid damage. Because he autos enough to offset that, or autos enough alongside using his Q and E to like bring it together and do almost perfect damage. If you're building like the likes of Sunfires, you're picking up like a Dark Seal, he is going to do close to mostly AP damage. If you're picking up things like a Titanic Hydra and you're going down like a more AD route, then you are doing mostly AD damage. But for the most part, he's a hybrid champion. You can opt into builds depending on the game state. But for the most part, I believe you're going Titanic, so it does make him more AD favored at the moment. Ornn is going to be mostly AP, so Ornn does do some physical with his Q, and that tends to be enough as you are using that early on into the game. Plus, you are autoing a decent amount. You do want to play within auto range to get Sunfires activated, but for the most part, you are just using W and your ultimate and doing mostly AP with these abilities. Sejuani is a hybrid champion, so Sejuani does a lot of physical damage with her W. Most people don't know this, but Sejuani W is a physical damage ability. Her E, Q, and ultimate are magic damage abilities though, so that does make her hybrid in her damage profile, but a W does have a pretty aggressive health scaler on it, which does make it a valuable tool. Nasus does mostly AD, so Nasus does auto a decent amount, but he does use his E and ultimate, which do magic damage. You are stacking your Q throughout the game, and you are utilizing the likes of Sheen for the most part, which is why he does mostly AD, but yeah, there is some level of AP damage there. Skarner does do some AP damage. His E, ultimate, and Q do magic damage. If you're building him tank, then he does even more magic damage and is closer to a hybrid champion. If you are building him with his standard core at the moment, which is the Trinity Force cleaver build, then he is doing mostly AD damage, but there is some level of AP there, which is why he's not a primary AD option. And K'Sante is a primary AD option. So K'Sante, even if he builds Sunfires, is a primary AD option. His entire kit is physical damage, and that leads to a kind of it's unique in the fact that K'Sante is the only for the most part, the only tank in the game which is just a primary AD option, bar Poppy, but then Poppy tends to opt into AD builds, whereas K'Sante doesn't need to do that and still outputs a lot of AD damage. Can make K'Sante really strong in certain situations. If you are needing an AD tank in the top lane, he will just be your best option for the most part. Sion, of course, is a close option, but yeah, nothing quite beats K'Sante in that regard. For K'Sante, you are building things like Kainic Rukun. I completely butchered the pronunciation, and then of course you're picking up things like the Frostfire early on in the game. You are going things like Sunfires or the AP the magic damage, the magic resist Sunfire option. There's options there for K'Sante, but for the most part he's a primary AD option. The plan with this is to kind of give people like a good guide on what their champion outputs, just to help with drafting. This should help people with like drafting ideas and being able to kind of adapt on the fly rather than having to go through and just look everything up. Let me know what you'd like to see, what kind of improvements, as this is kind of my first video on this kind of start of thing. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.